Welcome. I'm Allison Pingree. I'm here at the Graduate School of Education, and I'm going to give a moment to my co-presenters shortly, but our focus here today is about class participation, course participation. How do we move beyond thinking about it as a kind of checking the box formulaic approach? So to help us with this, I'll just go in this order. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi all, I'm Sejal Vashi. I'm the Director of Learning Design and Instructional Support at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I just wanted it to be as long as possible, right? And then I also teach in our Doctorate of Public Health program. And I'm going to pass it to a fellow Harvard Chaner.
Hi, I'm Aisha Yousafzai. I'm faculty at the Chan School at the Department of Global Health and Population, and I teach a methods class in qualitative research and a cross-listed class here at the Ed School, which is a really interesting one for participation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Luke Miratrix. I'm here at the Grad School of Education. I teach various statistics and methodology classes.
Wonderful. So, the ubiquitous participation grade, is it a fudge factor? What does it really mean? Why do we have them? Why do we as instructors seem attached to them? What do they mean for our students? How do the students see and experience them? What are ways that there's a misalignment between what we're trying to do in terms of learning goals and learning that matters most? And what are ways to make for a clearer alignment between what we want our students to experience and learn and what they themselves are coming to the class? So we're going to be raising these questions, showing some examples, and giving you some time to think about what are the implications or possible applications in my own context.
So this is a sneak peek slide. I'm going to break all the rules that they talked about this morning, and I'm giving you a poll. Is it okay not to have participation grades? Yes, no? Why are you making me participate? So while you're doing that, why am I making you do a poll? Why am I making you use technology? I do want to get a sense of everyone in the room, not just a few folks. In my own class, only have like 15 people, so I make little voting cards with coffee stirrers and old Post-it notes. That was not going to be feasible for our review for today, but I make the little voting cards because I often have votes that are more than just yes, no. So I want that third option. But all right. And then also didn't want folks to be influenced by their colleagues or their supervisors who they're sitting next to. All right. So we've got a fair share. Let's see where you fall. Oh. Is it okay not to have participation grades? Overwhelming yes. So now I am going to have y'all kind of talk more about this with the person next to you. And again, I told you I'm doing everything I was told not to do this morning. So please do not leave your colleagues in the lurch. Make sure folks are being included. But we have a few questions for you all. So for those of you who said yes, like, do participation grades mean something? If so, then you said yes, we don't need them. What do they mean to us instructors? Feel free to focus on one of these or touch on all three, but we're going to be about 5 minutes, get to know the folks at your table. There are little handouts if you want to write your answers, think about it first. And fun fact, these were printed on paper made out of recycled wood chips. Didn't know that was a thing, but.
So talking pairs or trios?
Go for pairs or trios, but again, don't leave a colleague at your table in the lurch. All right, so that was rapid fire. I'm just going to ask, say, 2 tables if anybody wants to give it any sort of aha from any of this.
Yeah, so Alan next to me was just talking about how part of his participation grade is like how well the other person does at setting the next person up. And so it's like we were using like the metaphor of the assist in basketball. And that's like part of what like moves things forward well in his class. Insightful to me.
So many people writing that down right now. So thank you, Alan.
I waffled a bit on my response and I landed on no. So it was one of the small percentage. But we talked a little bit about, I think when we talk about what a participation grade means, that definition has a lot of stigma associated with it and is thought of in a really narrow and specific way. But participation can look like a lot of different things. And so there can be a redefinition of what goes into a participation grade. And so I think when you can think more broadly about it, there's a lot more opportunity there. And there may be things that are part of a participation grade, but we don't call them a participation grade.
So on the lines of what Sarah was just saying is we decided after we talked about it, like, what is participation? Like, first define what participation is. So we weren't even sure exactly what we were talking. Well, we had ideas about how we felt about it, but what were we talking about?
Thank you all. I feel like your plants in this, because this is everything that we're going to go through. We're going to show examples of how folks are defining what they mean by participation. Is participation the same thing as engagement? Is it not the same thing? Can you participate and not be engaged? Can you be engaged and not participate? All sorts of questions. But traditionally, we tend to think of participation as, did I ask a question in class? Did I answer a question in class? And there are benefits and drawbacks of that. So a few benefits, you get feedback. Like, I just did this right now. Oops. Wanted to see, kind of gauge what's going on, level set. I get feedback, you get feedback. Could promote preparation, could develop speaking skills in terms of just speaking in front of people or also using the language of the field. But there is some drawbacks too, right? Penalizing introversion, and then a whole host of biases in who I call on, biases in terms of what I deem to be a good question or a good comment. So just keeping all that in mind, and we're going to go through more of these throughout the rest of this session. Also, I'm not saying that this is better than or not, because there's 3 pluses and 2 minuses. It's just, we're going to talk more about the biases coming up. But I'm going to pass it back to Allison now.
Right, thank you. So these are some of the benefits and drawbacks from an instructor's point of view. And I think most of us maybe were speaking from that standpoint. But there's been some interesting research, and these are just 3 studies, of which there are more, on what the student experience is. So I'm going to just say a little bit about each of these. So this first study, and all of them are relatively small, and they come from particular cultural contexts. So we have keep that in mind. But this first study comes out of the National University in Singapore. They surveyed 73 students and did interviews with 15 faculty. And in all of these, the assumption about what we mean by participation is the speaking up in class, right? So already right there, we've got a big limitation. But the students really were divided on whether that reflects, did I understand the material? Does this reflect anything about my effort in the class? Lots of concerns about the fairness, right? How are we applying these expectations across students, about whether some are excluded, whether there's a kind of overprivileging or overemphasis on oral capacity to speak. A lot of concerns about what does it mean to do this well, and feedback along the way about am I participating and speaking in a way that's instructionally seen as effective, and then just the time constraints. The larger the class, the harder it is to get in. The second study comes out of 2 universities in Germany, a total of 431 students, so a bigger sample size. Some interesting disciplinary differences. So some of the students feel like this might be fairly something we would expect, which is in a language course, you would expect there to be a higher need and higher value on speaking. If you're learning to speak a language, you need to practice that, versus in something like math. And this article goes into a great amount of detail about the importance of transparency, which we're going to talk more about in our examples. And then the final study comes out of a US university that looked at, that interviewed 19 students who had taken particular STEM courses. 15 of them were STEM majors, and 4 weren't, but these were, it's contextualized in STEM learning, and looked at a variety of influences or variables that played into students' decisions about whether to speak up, like what the instructor was like, what the relationship with other peers was like, what the course material. And they found there in that very small study a gender difference around what the kind of driving concerns were. So it's a complicated picture for our students as we say we want to have this participation grade.
So I did also just want to mention that on the back of the handout are a bunch of the sources and resources that are here. So the 3 studies that Allison just went through are in there as well. And this will be available digitally later, but in case you wanted it before a month from now. So one of these big problems, participation grades, we're saying that they're used to solve issues, but is the issue really related to actual engagement in the learning that matters most? And is it what the students want? So oftentimes we'll say, yes, I want them to participate. They need to build community. But maybe I'm not in this program because I want to build community. Maybe I have this amazing community already. And this is just, I want to learn some skills for my job. So how do we know what our students want? Are we actually asking them? I don't know. And then how can our participation methods align with both the course learning goals but also the students' goals for themselves? And we're going to have our fabulous faculty help answer some of those.
Okay, so the example I'm going to share is the way I approach participation grading in both my classes. One is a methods class, and it's really applied, so they have to really practice some of the skills that they'll use in qualitative methods and think about it in analysis. And the other one is both with students from the Ed School and students from the School of Public Health. So they're really there to kind of network and learn from different perspectives about this common area of early childhood. And so before I actually share the statement that I use on the syllabus, I want to sort of take you through a journey, as I'm one of those people who went from, no, I'm not really that interested in capturing the variation of participation and engagement in the materials, to someone that really thinks it's important and supports the learning. And so it starts with just very briefly sort of, addressing some of the common challenges that we all face in teaching, getting quieter voices to be more active in the classroom, and trying to manage the more dominant voices that may sometimes steer us off the learning objectives. But also thinking about, are the questions and the discussions that the students are raising, are they really helping them not just extend their knowledge, but also the kind of skills that I think are important, like critical reflection, being confident about sharing a perspective, or understanding what the strengths or limitations are in applying some of the methods that we're learning. And so then it really leads to, if I want to integrate all of that, how do I differentiate in the quality and in the engagement of their participation? And so the first thing I had to think about was, does the classroom environment really create opportunities for that participation to happen? And so these are all the things that I have found are somewhat successful strategies, some more in one class versus the other. Things like polls, discussion boards, debates on controversial issues, small group activities, and actually getting the students to lead discussions for that session. And these all sort of are intended to both extend learning skills, so getting people to reflect on the materials, getting people to think about them in context. But also, I think they vary to different strengths. So polls really help you to react quickly, while the discussion boards really give time for the students to prepare for the class in advance, with like thinking about the reading materials and thinking about what questions they have. So that provided the foundation for the statement. And so the participation is graded across 7 components. And this is literally copy and pasted from the syllabus. So it includes things like relevance, causal linkage, responsiveness, and analysis, evidence, challenging or redirection, and quantity. And so what I provide is examples. And in the syllabus, there's also more of a rubric. But that helps students. It provides a kind of a guide map or a roadmap rather of what participation looks like, what it really means to engage with the learning materials. And then it's graded in 2 ways. So 15% comes from the oral participation in the sessions across the semester, and the other comes from the discussion board. And I think it's because they both support one another. And over time, I've learned that there are three things that are essential for this to be effective. The first is ensuring that there are opportunities to participate in different ways in the teaching itself, in the classroom itself, as well as offline in the discussion boards. The second is introducing this in session one and having a discussion with the students about why this is important. It's not just about who asks the most questions every session, but actually what we're trying to gain from the discussion and the responsibility that I have, the responsibilities that each of them have. And then the final piece is to give feedback. And that can be in written form. It can be in office hours. It can be me reaching out to individual students if I have concerns. And so that's what I have found over several years has worked in these classes.
And what we're going to do is hear from both Aisha and Luke, and then we're going to have a space of time for questions from you all. So.
Hello, everyone. So what I wanted to talk about is, so first I want to say that I think when I had participation as part of my grade in the various classes for many years, I was just doing it because like I thought that I had to. So I just put it there. And then it gave me some wiggle room to sort of understand if some student had some extenuating circumstances or was clearly trying in a course, then I could like push their grade up or down. But then we're basically in Harvard, so everyone gets the same grade anyway. So it became a little bit strange for me to try to deal with it. And then when I moved to this school, I was teaching master's and PhD students, and my orientation towards teaching really shifted, where I just stopped, like sort of fundamentally resented the entire grading process totally, and thought of the point of my classes of just empowering students. I teach statistical methods classes, and my interest is students show up and they want to be able to do things for whatever reasons, like doing their research. And my only focus is like, okay, what do you want to do? How do I help you do what you want to do? And under that structure, I decided that instead of me deciding how someone is participating, I wanted to hear from them how they wanted to engage with the course. So I had, so the first time I did this, I just had them write at the beginning of the semester what their goals were for the course and what it meant for them to participate in the course. And students on their own would say things like, I don't like talking in class because it's really stressful, but actually I'm going to try to push myself to talk a few times over the semester. Or they would just say, I'm not going to do it. I'm actually not even going to come to class. I'm going to watch the videos because being in class, it's too fast. And with the videos, I can like pause you whenever I want and think about whether I agree or disagree. And so then I just took those, and towards the end of the term, I had the students just self-evaluate it first I think the first time I didn't actually do the midterm check-in. And then at the end of the term, I had them self-evaluate. And I said, you remember that thing you wrote at the very beginning of the semester? Did you do it? And the students seemed to be relatively candid about saying yes or no about whether they did it or not. And they would give themselves a grade. And then I would look at the grades, and basically I didn't have the moral strength to call out obvious liars that were like inflating their grades. So I'd be like, so what I ended up doing is like, I went through it. I'd be like, actually, I know who that person is, and they're being a little hard on themselves. So I would basically pump some of their self-assessed grades up to try to get some sort of equity in that process. Over the years, I've sort of pushed on that. I got some feedback from various students that gave me a variety of research papers about how different sociodemographic groups will tend to underestimate, be a little more self-critical, and others less so. So then I specifically called that out in both the final assessment and also at the very beginning, sort of saying like, you should think about this. Like if you're in this group, like, are you being too hard on yourself? Think about what that person next to you might be thinking about their performance, and how do you feel about that? And then I also added this mid-semester check-in, which sort of keeps that participation plan, this contract that these students are implicitly writing with themselves, more salient throughout the course. So instead of it just being this thing that they immediately forget, to have that where they actually review and reflect and then they write a paragraph seemed to sort of keep it more alive. Over the years, I've really greatly enjoyed this process, but I've also have come to realize that a lot of it, I think, is about that there is this relationship aspect of they are writing something that I am reading and then responding to. In the years where I haven't sort of put that focus and responded to it and sort of have that intimate one-on-one conversation with my students, I think it's actually less effective. So it doesn't, I haven't figured out a way to frame it in a way where this is really scaffolding something that they're doing for themselves in their engagement with the class. It does seem to somehow have this relationship aspect, which does mean that for like this year, I have a much larger class than normal and I was overwhelmed. And so I think that like the quality of it might be reduced because of that lack of like one-on-one interaction. And I think I also want to underscore, sort of listening to the first part of this presentation, just the idea of participation as like, are you like, I think there is this reflexive aspect of participation is being in a classroom and doing something. And a lot of students, and in the instructions, I call out all sorts of other ways of participating. Like, do you go to section at all? That's one form of engagement. Are you going to commit to doing the readings? Are you going to commit to reviewing materials? And students have come up with all sorts of different ways that they feel are participating that actually are in some sense very solitary endeavors, as well as they are committing to saying, I want to work with I want to work with my team, and I'm going to really invest in helping my teammates in these projects or other things like that. And it just putting the idea of participation in this much broader sense of what are your goals of the class? What does that mean to engage with the class? And so I guess for me, participation has sort of slid into engagement. So maybe I should change the name. I'm not sure. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Why don't you keep that, Luke? So we've got a good chunk of time. What questions do you have for Aisha and or Luke? I'll put one on the table and then we'll go to Ethan. Just a question for Aisha. How do you document, how do you track who says what and the quality and all those 7 criteria? How do you keep track of all of this?
So with the discussion board piece, that's easier because that's documented and you can give specific feedback for every student each week or for whoever participates that week. For the in-class, I have my teaching fellows kind of track what's being said, and then I also write my reflections at the end or the next morning, depending on when the session is. And I make sure that I'm reaching out to students to come and see me in office hours if I have flags or if I have areas where I think they can be improving.
Great, thank you. Ethan.
My question is also for you, and along those same lines, you talked about the importance of giving feedback. And I can sort of see that on a top level, but I'm wondering mechanically, what does that look like? What are you giving feedback on? What are things that you think merit giving feedback on? And how do you structure making sure you're giving feedback to every student as a practical matter?
So because I think it's a very personal situation, I'm doing it in 2 ways. One is at the individual level in office hours, we'll have a discussion on the topic where, I will give them an opportunity to kind of share their perspectives. We'll talk about what they might have shared in the class. And I sort of then start to push them to think about, well, how would you extend that idea? How would you build on what I might be thinking or what another student has said. So I'm trying to get them to be very practical. It's not an abstract discussion because I don't want to just say, oh, you've got to, go back to the paper and think about what the strengths of the paper were or think about the weaknesses of the paper. I want them to actually engage in that conversation in real time with me to get them to see it. And it's like a coaching, I guess. And then in the other one, it's just, I guess, what we all do in the class, which is really trying to use my own questioning to get them to react in a way that I think is extending those skills as well.
Hi, my name is Lucy Swedberg. I'm over at Harvard Business Publishing. Actually, Luke, I had a question as a follow-up for your approach, which I think is really novel. And it's about that first part. My understanding is that students might not used to setting their own plan for something like this. They're sort of waiting for the faculty member to tell them what they want. So how do you structure that first part? How do you get the students to really authentically tell you what they're hoping to get out of the course in a way that's about them and not the faculty member?
And I should flag, I don't know if there's a link on this, but some of my earlier versions of the materials, you can just, they did
There's a link in here to it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a link to sort of what those materials look like. And you can, I'd love to get feedback on whether people are like, why are you doing that? Like, you should do this other thing instead. But generally speaking, I sort of walk them through, like, this is what you should write. And then here are some examples of different ways of participating. And I give a menu of examples that is fairly extensive, that has both in class and out of class. And I specifically call out that there are many roads. And in the past, I've actually then, I can't remember if I did it this year, but would have a couple of example participation plans. And one year I actually just gave them prior student participation plans that I'd gotten permission to share. And so, but just having the multiple examples, I think, makes it very clear that there's not a right answer. And that seems to trigger what seems to be a fairly honest response. Some of the students just phoned it in. They're like, they write a paragraph which is basically says, I'm going to do what everyone does to participate in a class. Why are you bothering me? And I'm like, great, if that's how you want to participate. And then they just go and do it. And that's fine. Mainly the goal is to, like, open the door to different ways of engagement that feel good to the students. And I think some people see that door as open and take it.
Maybe one more question, Ian? Oh, no, I guess two. Ian and then Ankur. Yeah.
I also have a question for Luke. I really like this, the thoughtfulness behind the individualized approach to this that allows students to, it seems like you encourage them to stretch a little bit beyond what their comfort zone is. I'm curious if you've ever run into a mismatch. There's some value for participation for the whole class, that we get to hear from different perspectives. And if every student has the goal of participating more online, because I like to talk out loud, but I want to really improve my writing, so I want to express myself in the online discussion, does the class suffer when everybody is keeping to their plan, doing fine by their stated plan, and yet not encouraging that learning that would happen in one form or another? I mean, I can see that going either way.
I've found generally that the students, many students, I think, understand the value of engaging in the live class. Like, a lot of them will say in their plan, like, I don't like it, but I'm going to try to do it, basically. And so I just have a culture, and maybe it's because I'm serving mainly master's and PhD students that are really hungry. Like, they are there. These are electives, essentially. And so they're there because they want something. And so I don't know how that would translate if, like, everyone's like, this is meaningless, why am I here, or something like that. But I also think that so I think that saves the project. So I think I've been dealt an easy hand in that regard.
Okay, final question, Ankur.
Quick preface that was basically my question, but I'll pivot to with alternative ways of participation. I do worry about creating a backdoor for the AI hacker to then just let AI do the participation for them, even though for many people, this is actually a very valid way to overcome the biases that were listed. And so any strategies or thoughts on how to deal with this, or am I being overly paranoid about AI?
Do you want to?
I'm going to reveal something which is why I'm a bad professor, I think, which is I don't care. if some people do, like, because my goal, like what I said before, is like, those who want I will provide. The rest, they're going to do what they're going to do. And I think I'm probably leaning too far in that direction. That said, I think participation plans, like the participation grade, is something that basically most people, under any sort of class and structure that I've seen, like most people can check the box one way or another, and do it. And I don't know, that I do think that maybe I should reflect on that and see. But everything is mostly it's self-reported. Like it's overwhelming to check all these individual plans. At the end of the day, there is an honor system fundamentally. Like they're doing a self-assessment. For some students, I know because they participated so much that they're lying to me about how little they've participated. That's easy to fix. The ones that have participated a huge amount, or say they're participating a huge amount, and I'm like, who are you? Then that one deserves a little bit of scrutiny. But I do think this is a very smushy thing. Yeah.
I need to reflect on that.
Yeah. I'll say as we're transitioning, one of the safeguards against AI is, we'll give an oral exam. Do it in class, right? Like have them speak, which, in certain contexts can work really well, but then it's subject to lots of the other kinds of biases and pressures and inequities that we've hinted at least a little bit. So, okay, over to you, Sejal.
Thanks. I will say, go back to your learning goals. And is AI part of your learning goals or not? If they use AI, are you going against your learning goals? Then that's a conversation. So this is kind of what we really want folks to get out of here is align your participation, whatever you want to call it, engagement, participation, various activities with your own goals, your course learning goals, which those two might be the same, but they might be different. And then your students' goals. And I know that students' goals one is the harder one to find, but participation plans can be part of that. So I just want to give a few more examples. And again, you'll have these slides if you want, but we had a set of students 2 years ago, 2023, a set of pedagogy fellows who at Harvard Chan were like, participation is really confusing at this school. It is different from course to course. A lot of us take courses at other schools as well. At Harvard Chan, sometimes it's up to 20%, but we go to business school, it's 30 to 50%. And it's all often kind of that same thing of you have to talk out loud. And so they really wanted to look at, well, what are other ways you could do this? So they came up with this project on their own and they did it over a year. And so they came up with these kind of 3 steps of figuring out your own goals or your course learning goals as an instructor. So this first thing think about your broader purpose, identify a sub-purpose, and then align your activities. So it's, again, all about this alignment. And this is going to make more sense in 2 seconds. So they created this matrix. And they have these various purposes of, am I asking folks to participate because they need to reflect or synthesize? Is it really just about getting feedback? Is it developing professional skills? And then they started getting nitty-gritty into it. And they went through various activities you could do that's not just speaking out loud. And so they decided to categorize it by time commitment on the part of the students. Is it low commitment, medium commitment, high commitment? And I think they did a fantastic job coming at it from the student perspective of what we would like to see. I will just preface this with a caveat. Some of these I feel like could be in multiple boxes. So kind of think through that. But this is just one thing to start thinking about for yourself. What are my goals? What are my course learning goals? Why am I asking students to do something? And how could I do it in a different way? Folks are taking pictures, so I'll wait.
The final slide has a QR code to these slides, and we also have a bit.ly. I'll put it up on the board in a minute. So you can right away have all these slides.
And then Luke mentioned the link to his thing. It's the first link on the back of your resource page as well. So a few examples of what we found have been these really good matches between the learning goal and their participation. So learning goal, instructor's goals. And this wasn't called out in the syllabus of this is my learning goal. It's something that I went through and I was like, oh, this is a great goal. So this is from Christopher Golden's course, An Introduction to Planetary Health. And his goal for this class, he goes, I want you to leave the class seeing the world through a planetary health lens. So in his participation, at a minimum, be informed, complete assigned readings and homework, and pay attention to planetary health issues in the news. So his whole thing is see the world through this. Well, then you can watch the news, listen to the news. And he kind of rethought his participation because of his own social anxiety in terms of speaking up in class. And he's like, why am I having my students do this? So came up with a few other options for folks. But again, all the options still have to tie with this see the world through a planetary health lens. I'm going through these quickly, but again, you'll have them. This is another excerpt from Liz City's course at HGSE. And there's this broader learning goal. And again, it's not your learning objectives, but it's just broader goal. Like after this, students need to think and act strategically in order to make educational change for the better, both within this context, but then also beyond. So when you look at the participation components that are highlighted, again, we're using time between the classes. We need to process what's useful, what's not. We need to synthesize. And then again, at the end, it goes deepening the discussion to help both individuals and the cohort to continue to develop. So now, again, it's tying to that and beyond part at the top. So really think through, why am I asking folks to do this? Does it correspond to our learning goals? And am I clear about it in the syllabus, the first day of class, throughout the class, because nobody remembers what happens the first day of class. So these are just a few excerpts. But we really want you to now take some time. If you do teach, how might you apply any of the things you've heard in this session today to your own context? If you don't want to answer that question, or if you don't have a course of your own, how can some of the ideas that you've heard of before or heard today be expanded to include more student agency? So take some time, write them down, and then we'll hear out. How many folks did the first question? Whoa. How many folks went for the second question? How many folks just did something completely different? Love it. Somebody who did something completely different. You want to share what you talked about?
So we were talking much more about what we found really spoke to us about the first part. And I think the transparency, we can feel both as instructors and as student learners, or, lifetime students, to see how that benefits, knowing why is the instructor even having this? I mean, when I was an undergrad, it was so you showed up in class, but that was so long ago that was, a given. And I think that also having the why. So not only the transparency of why you're doing, of like what's behind it, but why you're doing it and how it's so fundamental. I think a lot of, especially undergrads, don't really understand the foundations they're building, help them in all these other classes. And so if you're not doing the work here, not being a member of the community, it's going to affect you downstream. I think Luke pointed out that having graduate students who understand that a little bit more makes it a little bit easier. But I think maybe undergrads really need to understand the why as well as the transparency.
Thank you so much. Yeah, transparency is key. And thank you again for also bringing up attendance, because that attendance is often conflated with participation, right? You look in syllabi and you see participation, 20%, and then the description is just coming to class. So what is it that you really want? Is it the attendance, or is it something more? So I think you again talk about, I just had to attend class before. So yeah, transparency is key. Anybody else want to share out anything about these or whatever else you talked about? Yes.
Yeah, which is part of that why being not only why is it really crucial for your learning, but you participate to strengthen others' learning. And I thought that was like something we talk often about participation as being important in the context of building a community and diverse perspectives, but that really explicit responsibility to serve your peers' learning as well with your active participation and your perspectives.
I feel like we just came full circle because we started off with that comment around Alan's session about how when you're participating, you are supporting somebody else. So with that, I can't end with a better segue from that. Full circle in 50 minutes. I'm going to hand it back to Allison.
Great. Well, and I know of a professor at the Kennedy School where I used to be who would have a process where at the end of the semester, students would nominate and basically name a student who most contributed to your learning, right? And then he could aggregate this and, you know, if you want to go in the direction of like, oh, there's like the student who did this the most for the most, or not, but and to name that you're going to be doing that at the beginning of the course so that you're thinking about what are the ways that I'm building off of, supporting, you know, passing that basketball. I think that's incredibly powerful. Wow, lots of really rich gems here. I had a teeny question, Luke, before we wrap. Is it really okay for students in your class to never come to class?
During the Zoom years when I started this, I was yes, and then I think I misspoke. Like now, my participation grade is self-assessed participation, and then there's a few like checklist things like, did you do the peer reviews you were supposed to do because other people were counting on it, and that's just like we grade you, and then for attendance we do take attendance, and that is an additional part of your overall participation grade. So the expectation is that you show up at class, and some students will reach out to me and say like, this isn't working or something, but the heavy pressure is to do it with a few exceptions, usually due to course conflicts.
Got it. Okay, thanks. All right, well, we hope that this has been thought-provoking and useful to you. Some of the takeaways that we generated as we prepared this have to do with, first of all, just raising awareness, like recognizing that some of the ways that we've been pushing against, the traditional ways can reinforce and be shaped by bias and barriers to exclusion, barriers to inclusion. So the invitation is to be intentional, right? And to unpack and to be transparent about what we mean by participation and engagement, and then to ground them in the learning goals of the course, but also to align them with what students are bringing, what their passions are, this reflects what we heard in the plenary today. Why are they engaging in this course to begin with? And what are the ways that we can be flexible and creative with them around how their path might best serve their interests in the context of the course as we've designed it as well. Are there other ideas that you see as a takeaway for yourself that anyone would want to be brave enough to articulate right now?
This is a cop-out, actually, but I heard lots of great ideas that I definitely want to explore, including which student had the most impact on your student learning. So I think part of this idea is, this session is to think about whether it's possible to incorporate some of these ideas and what that would take both from you as the instructor and the students to experiment with it. So I have a few ideas, including that one.
Excellent. Thank you. Wonderful. Victor. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I've been complicating this quite a bit for me today in terms of reflecting on how this falls into the framework of assessment, not the dirty word assessment, the essential part of good teaching and learning, and from two different perspectives. One, really thinking about how do we monitor learning, and so that formative assessment part of the cycle, and then the opportunities to give feedback, whether for teacher to student, peer to peer. And the other is how important it is for self-assessment and reflection, giving students the opportunity to self-assess, whether any of these dimensions, but I think that's a form of participation that I'm seeing linked to the assessment cycle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we just want to thank you for your engagement and participation today in this learning community that is the HILT conference. So thank you. And thank you to our presenters in particular.